Constructive Criticism is sponsored by Oasis Games. MTGOasis.com is the place to get cards for your next Magic event. Try them out with code CCMTG for 15% off of your first order, and use the code WouldThatBeGood for 4% off of every order. Want to support the show directly? Head on over to patreon.com/CCMTG to check out some awesome benefits and future goals for the show. Thanks for listening, and here's this week's episode of Constructed Criticism. Hello, everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of Constructive Criticism. I am your host, Spencer, and I am joined by my co-host, Matt Kling.
Hey, how's it going?
You know what, man? It's going good. Are you doing hey, how's it going just to, make up for Michael, or...
I don't know. It just feels natural.
It's funny, because Mason and Trey, I feel like always tried to not do the hey, what's up, and hey, how's it going, because they didn't want to be like you two, and you've just completely been like, no, I'm doing the Michael Hinderocker thing.
I don't know. What can I say? I'm a follower.
Also, did you shave today?
No.
Oh, you look like you look good, man. You look good. Those who are listening in podcast form, they can't see it, but those watching on YouTube, they know. Matt looks fresh. He looks good. You know what else is fresh is our sponsored Oasis Games. You can check them out at mtgoasis.com. I worked on that. I knew what I was going to say, Matt. That was just for you, baby. That was just for you. And you know who else is there for you is our sponsored Oasis Games. You can check them out at mtgoasis.com. You can get 15% off of your first order using the code CCMTG at checkout. If you have not ordered from Oasis Games yet, go use that code. What are you doing? There's new standard decks. You gotta go buy that Bangolos deck before it gets banned. You gotta go buy all of these awesome new Throne of Eldraine cards, or you got modern decks you need to get. Think about it, 15% off of a modern deck. That's a lot of money, man. You can also use the code WouldThatBeGood. If you've been listening to the podcast recently, you might not know what that means. But if you use the code, you get 4% off. And that right there, that's value. We're about value on this podcast. You know who else is about value is our newest patron, Chris B. Thank you so much, Chris. We appreciate you so much. It means the world to us to have those new patrons coming in. And we just want to give a special shout out to Chris, who is our newest patron. Speaking of patrons, Matt, the Discord is going to change. The Patreon is going to change because we have more money to be given out to those people, and I'm excited. So I'm going to be looking into Discord rewards for our patrons, including one of the things that's really hard is people don't just go to Patreon, right? It's like they really try to make Patreon this social media app that people use to connect with the content creators that they love. And it hasn't really worked really well for Patreon. So what they've done is they've created Discord stuff and partnered with Discord. So we're going to see what we can do to kind of figure out how to do that. And so we're going to see what we can do around the Discord, the public Discord, for all of our patrons. You know, we have the Facebook group for patrons of $5 or more. But we're going to see what we can do in the Discord to do questions, to do deck doctors, stuff like that. And we'll create different channels in there, as well as continue to post in the Constructed Critics group. So stay tuned for that. And, though there's no questions this week from our patrons, stay tuned for easier ways to post your questions to the podcast every week. Let's move on to hashtag always improving, Matt. Hashtag always improving is the point of the podcast. We want to be getting better all the time. Magic's hard, dude. I don't know if you know this. You're like a Smash player now instead, but...
Yeah, I'm washed in Magic.
No, but Magic's really tough. I mean, last week you talked about... maybe it's the week before. It had to have been last week. That was your first week back. But you talked about, that PTQ top 8 and just not playing the correct sideboard. And, that type of stuff happens to everybody. So... every week we want to be trying to improve ourselves. So, Matt, this week, did you play the right sideboard? How did you improve?
Well, the ways that I've improved this week is just trying a bunch of different things. I'm trying to figure out where my spots are in each of the metas. I think with Standard, well, I don't want to do too many spoilers before we get to the power rankings, but I think I have a pretty good hold on what's good in Standard right now. As far as Modern, I thought that I had a good deck for Modern, but I maybe didn't given the recent results. So still exploring that area. And,
we're not going to get into Modern this week. Why don't you talk about that really quick?
Well, so really quick, I was definitely under the impression before the SCG that the Paradoxical Outcome Urza deck with Jeskai Ascendancies was completely broken because it has several turn 2 kill options with Emery and Jeskai Ascendancy, and then some 0 mana artifacts. But it does appear that most of the people that are better at Magic than I am did not decide to play Jeskai Ascendancy this weekend, although they were playing Paradoxical Urza.
It's interesting because we posted in the Constructor Critics group. It was like, hey, if you're playing a modern tournament this week, I said the same thing. I was like, this is just the deck that you should be playing, and it's interesting to kind of see the SCG Tour shake out different results. I almost wonder though. I'm having a hard time with the team setting, and I kind of want to pull up the classic results kind of while we're talking, but it's interesting to me that I don't know that your mana is that much better by not playing Jeskai Ascendancy.
Yeah, I don't think that it's a mana thing. I think that Jeskai Ascendancy by itself can be a low impact card. You kind of need something to help it along. Usually either Sai or Saheeli or Emery. But
Yeah.
it is a large portion of your deck, honestly. So
For what it's worth, there was none of any of that in the top 16 for Wurza. There was a 4-color Wurza deck that took 16th, but it was just regular 4-color Wurza. I don't even see a paradoxical outcome in here.
right, yeah, I looked at these results already at one point.
I didn't look at much at the modern results because we were doing standard this week, but it was I did notice the same thing that you noticed, which was like people weren't playing Ascendancy, and Ascendancy gives you so many kill options. It was really funny because one of our patrons actually said, why play Ascendancy? And all of us, you, me, and Mason, were like, well, here's the reasons why to do it. And so many people ended up on different choices. Do you trust... So it's hard to say, right? Because we didn't just see people playing it. So it's hard to know if our results are wrong or if other people played a safer option because it was a team event. I don't know.
Yeah, it's certainly possible, and I mean, even we just discovered the deck like
2
the day
days
before.
Yeah, 2 days, 1 day or 2 days before.
Yeah.
I still am not willing to give up on Jeskai Ascendancy, but that being said, I am willing to believe that we're wrong.
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah, so I mean, honestly, the powerhouse of the format looks like Amulet Titan to me. If we're being honest.
It's interesting.
I've heard a lot of good Amulet players are saying that Once Upon a Time just completely fixes a lot of the holes in the deck.
Yeah, I was watching Mason stream today, and I mentioned like, "Hey, why? Like, this seems like bad Titan shift right now. Why do you like it?" And we didn't get a lot of conversation going about that. But I was actually hoping he would mention Once Upon a Time on stream and like how it changes the deck a lot, because you either have a high impact card like Titan or the Transmute land, or the bounce land that you need. And it's really funny. One of the conversations that happened, I think it might have been in our Discord, was talking about how Once Upon a Time seemed overrated. And one of the things that I had talked about in the Facebook group was, you really want high impact cards with that card. You can have high impact lands. And I think people kind of forget that certain lands can just be really high impact. And if you even out the number of cards, even if it's not creatures, then the 2 mana might become worth it in certain decks.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I was experimenting with it earlier today in Turbo Depths in Legacy, and I thought it was pretty good.
Yeah, I think the card is shaking out to be kind of what a lot of people thought it would be to start out, which is just this really high power green card in multiple formats.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say the sky is falling or anything like some people were
Yeah, sure.
believing with this card, but it is powerful in the right deck.
Yeah, it's totally fair. So where do you think that you ended up here? Are you going to try the paradoxical decks without Jeskai Ascendancy?
I've tried them without Jeskai Ascendancy before and was kind of medium on them. You're playing a lot of air. So I like the fact that Jeskai Ascendancy kind of gives you more action in spots where you normally would be drawing cantrips.
So how do you think that, if somebody's going to play these style of decks tomorrow, how should they attack it?
If you were planning on playing an Urza deck tomorrow, I would definitely try all the options and decide what works best for you. I don't think that there's a clear right answer to this, so I'm certainly not going to go out and say that I know exactly what you should be playing.
Do you still believe that Urza decks are the best decks?
I'm not 100% on that either right now.
Yeah. I think that if I was going to play an event tomorrow, just because all of the Modern that I've played has been with you since the PDQ. I would just play the Jeskai Ascendancy version. I think that people aren't prepared for it, and I think that gives me an advantage.
Sure. I mean, if I'm being honest, the deck that I would play tomorrow would probably be Devoted Druid, but
that's what I would expect you to say.
That's a whole different reason.
Well, so for me, always improving this week was a little bit different. I did a lot of standard preparation for the 12 win every card best of one, and I just haven't played that much best of one. But what ended up happening is the best of one actually taught me a lot about the standard format overall, and I went from bronze to gold in like a couple hours in best of 3 standard this week. And I don't play a ton of ranked. I was actually just doing it because I was like, this deck just seems good. I just want to see how far I can get. And I think I dropped 1 match total, and it was really crazy. A lot of the conclusions that I came to about the Golos deck were similar to some of the best teams. They found some technology that I didn't find. I immediately adopted that technology that we'll talk about here in a little bit, and I was pretty happy with it. I think that this is one of my favorite standard decks in a long time, and I think that you and I had talked about Fave Wishes. I had been posting updates to the deck in the Facebook group. And yeah, I just, my win percentage in standard is very, very high right now, and I am in the minority of saying that I legitimately love this standard format.
That's fair.
So let's go on to our next segment, though. We're not going to talk too much about best of one, but could be a longer podcast, so we want to get right into the meat of it. And we're going to talk about the power rankings. So this week we're going to present you with the power rankings and kind of our initial thoughts, and then we're going to dive into kind of our initial reactions to the week 1 of this format. Because despite the fact that we have all of this information from fandoms and all these arena tournaments, this is in fact the first week that this set is technically legal, Matt.
Yeah, it definitely feels like it's been out for longer than that now, right? They just did a lot of early release stuff.
Yeah, we had the early streamer event, so we saw all those decks. Then we have the fandom tournaments, and then we have the SCG. So it's almost like 3 weeks of events leading up to this format. But in all facts considered, like, this format is less than 10 days old while we're recording this.
Is it even? It's not even that old, right? It just came out last Friday. The release was last Friday.
It's 4 days old.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy to think about. So we'll start with we have a tie in 5th and 6th. So for those who don't know the way that power rankings work, right now they're loosely based on record. So basically you get 6 points for first, 5 points for second, 4 for top 4, 3 for top 8, 2 for top 32, and then 1 for top 64. We have no top 64 results this time. This typically happens when the events are team events. There's actually just not enough teams going in to give you those kind of records. And then the classics and the mocks, which are the other events that we took into account for these, don't actually post enough decks for that to happen. So we usually rely on SCGs or GPs to give us those top 64s. None of those that were available. So the lowest points you can get are 2 points. With that being said, in our first 5th place / 6th place, we have Golgari Adventures. And Matt, I think you and I might be on different opinions about this deck. So why don't you actually kind of go first about where you think this deck sits in the format?
I'm honestly not sure where this deck sits in this format, only because it looks like a small-ish mid-range deck, and that just seems disastrous to me against the other decks we're going to talk about later.
Yeah, this is one of the few decks that this is in fact the only deck I've lost to in this standard format.
That's fascinating to me. And you were
I was playing Golos.
This is actually really hard to do without spoilers.
No, we can do spoilers. The first place deck is obviously Bant Golos.
Right.
Which is the deck that I've been playing. This is the only deck I've lost to.
Yeah, that's very interesting to me. It doesn't look like on paper that Golgari Adventures would have a good Golos matchup. But I can believe that there's things that I'm missing.
Yeah,
it sounded like the list that you were playing against were quite a bit different, though, right? Like you were telling me about getting burned out by the adventure creature with the with the Lucky Clover, rather.
Yeah, if we look at like the best finishing list of all of these lists, I think it was Sean Kibble coming in 3rd place in the Classic, and he's not playing Lucky Clover, and he's not playing the Lifelink Knight, which
Right.
which is the only thing that I've lost to for what it's worth. One of the things that I noticed about playing Lucky Clover for what it's worth is that you're kind of cutting your fine finalities and you're relying on your Order of Midnights to become fine finalities by playing those Lucky Clovers. And it's interesting, right? Because the other deck that comes in at 5th and 6th place is Mono Red.
Sure.
And if Mono Red is good, I just don't think Lucky Clover is a playable card.
That's definitely true. Touching back on this Golgari Adventures deck, though, like, I don't think this deck is bad in a vacuum. I think it looks strong, but this does not look like the format for this deck to me. Like, you're playing a bunch of high-impact 4-drops and just infinite value, right? Like, you have a bunch of spells that are also creatures, and you draw a bunch of cards, and you're playing, efficient removal and sweepers, and
I actually
a bunch
really
of things
hate
to buy back things from the graveyard, but that just doesn't go over the top of what's happening right now.
Yeah, I actually really hate Rankle in this deck for what it's worth. I don't think I've lost to Rankle yet in this standard format, and I think that this is like the wrong deck for that card. And so when I see Rankle in Sean's list, and Sean obviously took third at this classic, so not trying to take anything away from him. I just don't know that that's where I would go with these style of deck lists. I do like the fact that this deck gets to play Assassin's Trophy and Legion's End and Once Upon a Time. It might also be one of the better Once Upon a Time decks for what it's worth, but I just have a hard time. I think that I would rather go all in on these synergies and just like try and create these synergies. The way that I was losing, by the way, was that what would happen is I would wipe their board, and they were kind of more all in on the Knights theme, even going so far as to play the 3/2 Knight that when a creature dies, you draw cards.
Is Midnight Reaper a knight?
Yeah, I believe it is.
Wow. Okay.
I'll double check that, but I believe it is. And that was one of the things. Midnight Tears is not what I meant to type in. But like the thing is I don't know. It was like. Yeah, it is in fact a zombie knight. The thing that I was noticing is like the knight themes was actually way more powerful than trying to play like Rankle and stuff. I don't know that those decks were playing Questing Beast, but I would play Questing Beast in the deck.
I mean, it makes sense as a meta call, right? Like, I mean, it's obviously powerful just in general, but even if you're playing a deck that wouldn't normally be interested in just a nice beater, it's going to be better because there are a lot of zombies in the format right now.
Yeah. That makes a ton of sense. Let's talk about the next deck. This is a deck that people just swear to World's End is bad, Matt, and that's Mono Red Aggro.
Yeah. What can we say about this deck? Basically, it is Runaway Steamkin and Experimental Frenzy, and then whatever pile of red cards you happen to want to play.
I think that Bone Crusher Giant is good in this deck for what it's worth, and I think that it's like a fine replacement for Goblin Chain Whirler, and kind of, I think that it could become a format warping cards in certain worlds. But, I did a deck tech this week on the Arena Mythic cast, and I don't know that I'm a believer in Torbrand yet. I don't know. I don't know if that's a thing that I believe is the right thing to do. That being said, I did post a Mono Red list that I would play if I was playing Mono Red in the Constricted Critics group. It was the first deck that I, in my hashtag quest for 10 for this season, that was the first deck that I was trying to get 10 wins with. And I did find a list that I was having success with. It's just hard for me to believe that, like, in a world of these decks with these 5/5s that can block no problem for 3 mana, that this in these the Beauty and the Beast card, like I just don't know that this is the deck that I want to be playing, especially like Questing Beast has Vigilance and like I don't know. Also, this deck losing Lightning Strike has just felt really bad.
So I definitely agree with you that this deck does not look well positioned against the Golgari Adventures deck. That's the point I'm making, though, right? Is that like this is a mono red deck that doesn't really have a lot of aggression in the early game. It's more like a combo deck, honestly.
Yeah. But how do you even get off the combo?
The combo doesn't beat removal spells is the problem.
Yeah, and like it's funny because like a lot of people are saying like, oh, just go all in on Tolbrand, and like you see lists playing Fervent Champion as their 1-drop, so to take advantage of Tolbrand, it's like that's fair, and also it turns your shocks into lightning strikes when they're blocking. But like, what happens when they play a 5/5 or a 4/4.
Yeah, I mean that's certainly true. I think that if the metagame moves away from removal, though, it doesn't really matter, right? Like,
Sure.
if we're talking about questing beast deck, or sorry, Lovestruck beast decks, I think the deck that you're referring to is mostly the Golgari deck, which has, Midnight Reapers and other removal spells.
Well,
Whereas
I think that the green white deck also plays Left Side Priest, right?
it does, but I'm not convinced that your matchup against Torbrand specifically with that deck is good.
Sure.
I think that your mono red matchup looks fine until they play a Torbrand, and you just don't have any removal spells in the deck, so
Okay.
you're not going to be able to play against this card for very long, no matter what.
Okay. So where do you think mono red sits?
It would not be a deck that I would play right now.
Yeah.
I think that they have ensured that the 1-drops are not playable enough to make Experimental Frenzy and Runaway Steamkin the pillars of the format right now. And I think at some point that might not become true, but for right now, I would not play this.
Yeah. One of the things that we didn't mention on the last deck before we get into this next deck, is that I'm also losing to Knight of the Ebon Legion out of the green-black decks, which the list that took third did not have. So
Right.
this deck, however, does have it in mono black aggro. Talk to me about this deck, Matt.
Yeah, let me pull up a list really fast.
Yeah, I think that I can start us off here by saying, while mono red does not have great 1-drops, mono black does seem to have some pretty spicy ones. I don't know that I'm a fan of like Footlight Fiend, but Gutter Bones and Knight of the Ebon Legion are certainly 2 1-drops that I would be interested in playing.
Yeah, it's really nice to have 1-drops that have more than 1 power. I mean, that's been a big trend recently, is that a lot of the aggressive decks have had to play 1/1s for 1. And it's nice to have not only a 2/1 for 1, but like Knight of the Ebon Legion plays, like a 4/5 for 1.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is the honestly, this looks more like a true aggressive deck to me than the mono red decks right now.
Me too.
The curve even looks a little bit lower. But yeah, it's a pretty typical aggro deck, except it has a little bit of card advantage thrown in there with Midnight Reaper and some of the Amass cards and Gutter Bones.
Yeah, even if you look at like Order of Midnight and Murderous Rider, like it's simulated card advantage in a lot of ways for you.
Yeah, definitely.
And
then
us,
you have Ayara and Rankle to actually generate cards as well. Like Rankle seems quite good in this deck if it's not good in the other one.
oh yeah, I think Wrinkle is substantially better in this deck. And when I was playing the streamer event for Wizards of the Coast, that Rankle, this is the deck Rankle impressed me out of.
Right.
And also, this is also the deck that Arya, or is it Arya or Araya?
Ayara.
Ayara. Well, there you go. That card was super impressive to me out of all the mono black decks, and something that I expected to see going into this format.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's obviously cost prohibitive, but if we're already willing to play mono black, then just great.
And to be fair, I mean, if we're talking about like if my 1-drops are better in this deck, this card certainly is one that is more aggressively slanted anyway.
Yeah.
So, is there any? I mean, what do you think about this deck's position in the metagame versus mono red?
I would be more inclined to play this one than mono red. I'm still not 100% sure that it's fast enough to pressure the Golos decks in the way that it needs to, but
Sure.
it looks a lot closer.
Yeah, this deck comes in with 13 points, so only 1 more point than mono red or Golgari Adventures. The next deck also only comes in with 1 more point, and that's going to be a trend for a while. We have Bant mid-range. This is a deck that I am not convinced is good. One of our previous co-hosts, Mason Clark, teamed with MPL member Jessica Esteban, who played this deck. They said that they believe that this deck actually does have a good Golos matchup. I don't know, man. Like,
Okay, so when we're talking about Bant mid-range, it's like the Bant food deck, right?
yeah.
Okay, great. So, yeah, I don't believe that it would have a good Golos matchup. I'm sure that you have draws that can beat Golos, but the problem is that the core of your deck is Oko and Wicked Wolf, and having played the Golos deck a fair amount against those cards, I can tell you that they're just zeros in the matchup so much of the time.
Yeah, the number of times that I have somebody like trade my Golos for their food token,
Right.
and then I was just Teferi bounce my Golos, and then they like looked like, oh well, that was
Yeah, I've made that exact play before as well, and
And it's just
every time it just like is a concession.
yeah, it's just like, all right, well, I can't win this game now, and it's like, yeah,
Right.
I play my Golos, like,
Yeah.
let's go.
But
Uh,
yeah, I mean, I've played against this deck with Golos a few times, and like they'll have like an Oko at 14 and like a Teferi Time Raveler at 6, and you're like, wow, how are none of these planeswalkers
that's
effective?
that's actually the thing that I've noticed the most is how much like as strong as Oko is, it's just too slow.
Yeah, I mean, I just also think that its modes aren't relevant in every matchup, right? If the game isn't about like creature combat and specifically not go wide creature combat, if it's not
Yeah.
about one-on-one creature combat, then he just doesn't have a relevant mode.
Yeah, to be fair, if Jessica and Mason are right, I do think this deck dumpsters on the previous decks that we've talked about for the most part.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, this looks really well positioned, and it's a strong deck. It looks well positioned against non-Golos decks, I should say.
Yeah. What do you think about the Gilded Goose Arboreal Grazer? I know that, to be fair, there was a tweet going around that I loved because I also had played against this deck like 5 times that day, where people were just all in on Arboreal Grazer, Gilded Goose, 3-drop Planeswalkers, and people were like, I don't know who thought this deck up, but like, this is not good. But Jessica was not all in on that. I don't think other people were all in on that. But where do you think that Arboreal Grazer sits in these style of decks? This deck is only playing 24 lands for the most part. I think I looked at a couple lists that were playing 25. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't like Arboreal Grazer in these decks. I think that the Gilded Goose is really nice because it makes food, which is also relevant for a lot of your other cards. But realistically, I just don't think that you need to play your Planeswalkers on 2 as often, and you're going to be drawing a 0 a lot of times in the late game.
Yeah, I think so too. I would be interested, if Mason has any thoughts on this deck to post in the Discord. But I think that like we said, I think this deck is well positioned outside of its Golos matchup. But if Mason and Jessica are right, then this might just be one of the better decks in the format.
Yeah, I mean, I've played against this deck a little bit with Golos, like I was saying, but it's possible that my sample size is just small enough to where
No, mine is
I
definitely
don't
small.
understand the intricacies of the matchup. But if this has a good Golos matchup, then I don't know that it has any natural predators.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the next deck, and I think we're going to talk about specifically the Cavalier version, if that's okay with you, Matt.
Of Jeskai Fires.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is there another version we should talk about?
I mean, there's the other version that's like very Planeswalker centric, right?
Yeah. Which, to be fair, was a lot of the points. I did combine them because I think that both versions are very interesting. So while the Golos decks were split up into Golos Fires and regular Golos, this deck was combined. But I think it's combined for a good reason, and that's because I think that Jeskai is the natural home for Fires of Invention. I think that you have Teferi, you have you have a kind of more controlling shell for what it's worth. You have Time Wipe or Realmcloak Giant or those kind of cards. That's more interesting to me than kind of just trying to double dip with the Golos decks. But this deck is super interesting. Whether it's the Planeswalker version or whether it's the Cavalier version, you have this value-driven deck or this combo deck with Fires. Which one do you prefer?
I'm not really sure, to be honest with you. It depends on how capable the Cavalier deck is of winning a game without Fires of Invention, because I think that the Jeskai Planeswalker decks have proven that they can win games without it. Even if
It was one of the best decks last
very
format
hard.
for a couple weeks, right?
Yeah, it's certainly. I mean, this is a different format than it was then, so I imagine they're having a much harder time winning without Fires right now. The biggest problem that I could see with the Planeswalker variant would be that Fires is just not good enough some amount of the time. Like, I've played against the deck a little bit on Arena, and I've definitely played against a Fires of Invention for 6 turns or whatever,
Right.
and not lost the game to it.
Yeah, I think one of the things that the Planeswalker decks needed up more of that the Cavalier decks get right is actually Dawn of Dreams. That actually seems very good in the Fire decks, and I feel like my Planeswalker opponents aren't playing enough of that card. Like, I think they usually have 2 of them in their deck, it seems like, but I think that card is like the thing you want to do after you cast a Fires of Invention.
Yeah, it definitely makes sense to have cards that replace themselves, right? Like, I think that the most obvious inclusion for Fires is Bay of Wishes. It just makes
Yeah.
sense, right?
Yeah.
And then beyond that, like you were saying, like wraths actually make a lot of sense. I would like to see more 4-drops in these decks so that like fires
Yeah.
effectively cost 0.
I do like that. I think that Deafening Clarion is another one that I'm pretty impressed with, that I don't know that the Planeswalker deck always takes the best advantage of. It's really helpful, but the problem is with the Planeswalker versions is like Deafening Clarion is specifically better when you're ahead in that deck, especially with a Sarkhan in play. And what I would like to see is more Deafening Clarions to wipe the board or when you're ahead. And I think that the Cavalier versions do a better job of utilizing that.
What makes you say that out of curiosity?
Well, so you actually need extra turns with the Cavalier deck, right? Because you need to not be dead and you need them to be close to dead. So it makes Stephanie and Clarion better in that deck. Whereas with the Planeswalker deck, like it just is protecting your Planeswalker. So maybe it's the same. Maybe it's 6s and I'm kind of over-representing
it. And you're a little bit overthinking this.
Yeah.
One,
as I'm saying it, it could be similar as it protects your planeswalkers. But if we just kind of pull up Jeskai decks, I think that I don't know. It as I played against these decks, it has felt better on the non-planeswalker version side. And as I said, I've only lost with Golos against one deck, but I have played other decks, and I've lost to the Jeskai version of this deck a couple times with a couple of different decks, usually green-based aggressive decks or green-based mid-range decks that aren't Golos, and the Cavalier deck impressed me more. But small sample size. That's not a ton of stuff. But as I'm talking about it, I think that you do win the game on the spot if you cast both sides of a Deafening Clarion with a Sarkhan in play most of the time.
Right. Yeah, I've certainly lost to Deafening Clarion out of the Jeskai Planeswalker decks plenty of times. But yeah, I think that I would worry a lot about the Cavalier deck being able to win without fires, considering there are no good ways to find it.
Yeah.
But it's obviously very powerful when it's
happening. You have Dawn of Dreams, right?
Yeah, Drawn from Dreams is...
Drawn from Dreams.
I assume that's what it's called. I don't actually know for sure, for what it's worth.
Well, I just closed the window, so I'll never be able to tell you.
It's fine. But yeah, I mean, that certainly helps, but you have to be able to take a turn off to cast it and then be able to play fires the next turn, right?
For what it's worth, this also only had one more point than the previous decks, which was Bant Midrange. However, the next deck had 74 points, not including the fires version of this deck, and that is Bant Golos. Matt, this is the deck that I've been playing the most of. I'm sure it's the deck that you've been playing the most of.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I played the first game with this deck and decided that there was no possible way that this wasn't the best deck in the format. So
what made you feel that way?
Well, first of all, my draw in the first game that I played with this deck was exceptionally good. I realized that a little later, but
you had zombies on turn 3.
I don't know if it was. It was like turn 2 Growth Spiral, turn 3 Circuitous Route, turn 4 Golos. So does that make zombies? It probably does, right?
Well, you can play Grazer on 1 and make zombies on 3.
Right. Yeah, I don't think that I did that good, but yeah, I think the problem is just that I could see just from having looked at the sets that there weren't going to be a good enough aggressive options to stop you from exacting your game plan, and it's just too over the top of everything else.
Yeah, that's mostly how I felt too. Outside of getting burnt out by the night card, the one that drains you according to the number of nights that they have in play, I just haven't had anything that's had enough aggressive or enough reach to kind of beat this deck out.
Yeah, I definitely agree, and it has a surprising amount of life gain, so the reach plan isn't going to get there very often.
Yeah, it's been really interesting. Like I told you, I think I was texting you this match happened. I was like, I'm going to lose this match. And I was like, oh no, I'm going to win. And then my opponent played a second Lucky Clover. I was like, maybe I can lose. Also, fun fact, always improving moment. So I had a moment, an always improving moment in a match where my opponent rolled a 5, and I knew that they had the Knight that drains in their hand. And I was like, okay. And I had a Fave Wishes, and I was like, well, I'll just exile them all. Fun fact, you don't have to cast the card to be able to cast it off of exile. If it is exiled as an adventure, you can just cast it as a creature. So they cast a bunch of them, killed their own dudes, brought them back with Order of Midnight, and then killed me. And I was like, all right, well.
Is that true?
That is how it worked on Arena, so...
So you're saying that the creature was exiled through some means, and then they were able to
Yeah.
cast the creature?
So I knew they had one in their hand, and I knew they had them in their graveyard, and I didn't want them to be able to Order of Midnight it back. So what I did is I Fae of Wished for the exile the extraction effect, whatever that's called.
I don't know which one you're talking about.
It's the 3 mana black blue one.
Oh, Unmordigo.
Unmordigo. I Unmordigo the card. They all went into them being able to cast them, and then they cast them all. And I was like, oh.
That's strange. I don't think that it's supposed to work that way.
Well, if that's true, Arena owes me some money, dollar bills,
I remember them specifically talking about it on coverage about some confusion as to whether cards were exiled or on an adventure.
Well, now I'm upset.
And it seems like that wouldn't be necessary to track them if whenever they got exiled, they
leave a comment.
Also, there would be like combo decks centered around that, right? Like, there's got to be a way to abuse that, especially with one that drains you.
I'm just telling you what happened to me on Arena.
Okay.
So if Arena's working incorrectly, we gotta fix that.
Yeah.
Because that was frustrating. I was like, oh, this just wins me the game on the spot, and then I died.
Yeah, I don't think it should work that way. If it does, don't at me.
Or do, and ask him for VODs, But I think the most interesting thing about this deck, something that we didn't have going in, was Kenrith.
Yeah, that was by far the most interesting thing that I saw in play. Well, to be fair, I didn't ever see it in play, but I saw it on the stack a few times, and it looked really good there.
Well, let's talk about this as far as the week 1 reactions go. Matt, when you look at a deck as far as this week, what were you looking for as far as deck lists go?
Well, I had a pretty specific agenda in mind going into this week, which was try to see if anybody's found something that beats Golos.
Okay. Did you?
Yes. There were Golos decks that
beat other Golos.
Yes.
Yeah, that was my reaction too. It was interesting to see the differences from the Fandom Legends events, and I think the thing that I was looking for is specifically I was looking for aggressive decks. Am I missing something? Is there a white weenie deck? Is Loxodon good enough to crush people with Unbreakable formation or something, right? Am I missing something on that axis? Right. And I just don't know that I saw that. I mean, I'm sure people tried it, right? Loxodon is a really powerful card. White Weenie was one of the better decks for a long time last season. I don't know that people found that.
I think the green-white Adventures deck is reasonable. It's not favored against Golos, certainly, but it is a justifiable choice.
So what would you play next week if you were playing an aggro deck? If you were we're playing Smash, we're banning stuff, or we're banning heroes in whatever.
Sure. Yeah, it depends on what we have to define as an aggro deck. I could see myself playing the green-white deck, but I'm not sure that I would define that as an aggro deck, given that you're playing 4 March of the Multitudes and a bunch of other things that go really late, like Tristanis and things like that.
Yeah.
But if we're defining, aggro deck as something that I would consider an aggro deck, I would play mono black.
Yeah, I think for me, I would probably lean towards mono red because I think that it's pretty good against a bunch of stuff that is different. But that being said, I need to give another shot to this Golgari deck because I do think that the Knights deck is aggressive enough. It gets to play a good 1-drop. It gets to play, aggressive cards that are good on the vanilla test, as well as kind of having some of that. It plays into that aggressive mid-range style that I like. Mm-hmm. And I would describe Lovestruck Beast as an aggressive card.
Yeah, Lovestruck Beast is just a good card on every front, really.
Yeah. So, with that being said, what deck surprised you the most?
I was surprised at the players that were playing the food decks, if that counts.
Talk about that.
I just don't think that these decks are very well positioned, and players that are much better than me seem to disagree. So that is interesting to me and something that I would like to take a look at.
Yeah, I think the thing that kind of surprised me the most as far as decks go is really how poorly Dance of the Mance did. Literally got 0 points in the power rankings. That wasn't
surprising to me. I felt like that deck was nonsense from the first time I saw it.
I mean, so did I, but like, so I also didn't think the deck was going to be good, right? Like, I was like, this just goes under this deck. It's not good against these decks. But the thing is, it won the literal first tournament. People have to buy cards for these SEGs and for the mocks and for all these things, and just 0 points. I would be shocked if 0 people played this deck, but it got 0 points.
Sure. I guess that I am a little bit surprised that that happened as quickly as it did.
Right, that's my point.
It feels like we're so much farther into a metagame than we normally would be, like we were talking
Right.
about before.
Yeah.
But yeah, normally I would expect those kind of bad decks to still be somewhat prevalent by, the first day of the set release.
Yeah. So
But
we got a little bit of a conundrum coming up, Matt. They announced that there is going to be a banning in a week and a half, or there could be a banning here in a week and a half.
so I think it's reading in slightly too much to say that that automatically means there's going to be a banning, right? It has a lot more to do with when they think that it would be best to have the format under control, right? Like
Right.
they want to give some time to make sure that the format can't adjust, but they also don't want like major tournaments to happen that are just ruined by the field being,
Well, there's a major tournament right before.
85% ban Golos.
Right. There's a major tournament right before and right after this new announcement, which is on the 21st.
Right. I believe the announcement's on the 18th.
It is. I'm 95% sure it's on the 21st.
Let's have a look. See.
But that being said, while you look this up, like, where do you think the format can head, or do you think it's already way too defined in week 0?
I think that I am giving up on the idea of beating Golos and deciding how hard I want to go on. You're right, by the way, it was October 21st. I have decided to not try to beat Golos, and I've decided that I'm going to try to figure out what level I want to be on as far as teching my deck for the mirror,
Sure.
which is actually a pretty fine line to try to tightrope, because
Yeah.
if you start going too hard on mirror tech, then your deck does actually become bad enough to lose to the even bad aggressive decks.
Yeah. I think that I'm in it. I mean, first of all, Golos is just my style of deck. Like, you'd have to pay me a lot of money not to play this deck in a tournament.
Sure.
I think that the metagame is getting defined. I also think that there's a little bit of an overreaction in my opinion. Like, I think that just because there's a very clear best deck, it's a big mana deck. There aren't great aggro cards right now. There's a new set coming out in a couple of months. Like, and there's a lot of tools lying around right now, that for decks that if they just get a couple more pieces could totally be viable. I think one of the biggest problems and one of the things that I've noticed is that the best Fae of Wishes deck is Golos, in my opinion. And if that's the case, it's just kind of hard to beat.
Right.
Like,
can we talk about that for a second? Because I found that to be very interesting as well. That I've seen so many Bant Golos decks running one Fae of Wishes, and that just seems bizarre to me. I just don't know that I even want to play any Fae of Wishes if I'm going to play one. Right?
Yeah, I know Brian Gottlieb said he would play 2 or 3, and he would not play less than that, and he would not play 4. And I'm down with the no 4 plan. I think that might be too many. I was on 3. I cut 1 recently for a Kenrith, but I agree. I think 1 is too few.
It just doesn't make sense. Like, you can't realistically justify filling up your sideboard with the hosers that you need it to get if it's going to be a 1-of, right? Because then your sideboard becomes you're playing a 10-card sideboard for potentially 1 card in the main deck, and that's just not worth it.
Yeah. One thing that I also noticed is that the 1/4 is like weirdly good in this deck because it's a flyer, has been really relevant, and it's got an insane amount of toughness against the aggressive decks.
Yeah, it just gives you something to do also in the games where you don't draw exactly Growth Spiral or Grazer.
Yeah, I think that like it being a good Fae of Wishes deck, it was really funny. One of our patrons, Josh Collier, shout out to him, by the way, who took my deck list, got 11 wins with it in the 12-win event. Shout out to him. Probably one of our best finishing patrons over there. So super awesome to one. It always just makes me happy when I put in work in something and it pays off for our patrons. Like, that's why I do what I do, and it means a lot to see that kind of stuff pay off. But the list that I posted had 3 Fae of Wishes in it, a huge Fae of Wishes sideboard, And
Yeah, I mean you're playing best of one, so it was gonna be a 15 card fave.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, but when I switched the deck to best of 3, it didn't change that much.
Yeah, I can definitely believe it. I am definitely a fan of Fae of Wishes in the deck, and I
Yeah.
am legitimately not a fan of a lot of the things that people are doing. So I would find it pretty easy to find the cuts.
Yeah, outside of Veil of Summer and some kind of counter spells, like, and maybe Agent of Treachery, depending on how you think the format plays out. Like, what else do you want
For
for just a sideboard for this deck?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I don't think that you need like a lot of real sideboard cards, so it makes more sense to me to have Wish sideboards.
Yeah, I think so too. I think that makes a lot of sense. Let's talk about the sweetest thing that we saw in play. I think that we both did not see Kenrith coming, man.
Yeah, I certainly didn't see it. I mean, I remember reading the card once and thinking that it was actually pretty powerful. Like a 5/5 for 5 with several abilities is nothing to.
It certainly passes the theory of words from the mouth of Casey Bloodworth and Spencer Howland. But like I think you and I talked about this when we were at Oasis this week. Just the red ability is so crazy because you think, yeah, it's a 5/5 for 5, but it gives itself haste and trample, right?
It does, yeah.
And your Beanstalk Giants and your Realm Cloak Giants, like the trample ability is like kind of tacked on, and that's the ability that I noticed in the SCG a couple of times.
Yeah, I didn't notice the trample come up super often, but the haste was absurd. I think that that's way more of something you have to have a whole format to appreciate, though. Like in a vacuum, 1 mana, give all your creatures haste and trample doesn't sound broken. But then when you're like, oh, but we're actually making like 10 zombies in 1 turn sometimes,
Right.
then it's a lot more broken.
Right. I mean, that's true too. Also, like, you have all this mana in this deck, so you're just drawing cards sometimes. You're gaining life when that's relevant. Like, it has so many different abilities. I was really impressed. This was the sweetest innovation for that deck by a lot this week.
Yeah, I liked it. I'm surprised at how many people are already caught onto it. Like there are several deck lists that have the Kenriths in them.
Right. Yeah. With that being said, Matt, I'm playing this deck. Are you playing this deck?
Yeah, if I was playing standard, I would definitely play Golos. I'm not sure on an exact 75, but
Sure.
it would include Kenrith,
and it would include Fae of
Wishes.
Yeah, me too. I'm the exact same place right now, and we'll post deck lists. I think that Matt and I will both probably be posting standard deck lists in the Constructed Critics group. So if you're a patron of $5 or more, check that out. I'll be continuing to. I might even grind ladder this month. Like that's how much I enjoy the standard format right now. So and I hate doing that. So like, stay tuned. Stay tuned for that. That's kind of it for this week on the standard format, Matt. Is there anything you kind of want to say about the format or about things that people should try to do to beat Golos, or are you just kind of all in on Golos right now?
Yeah, again, I'm not really willing to try to find anything to beat Golos right now. I think that I'm happy that there are people that are doing that because if it were if everybody were like me, then I would guarantee that Golos would get banned, or Field of the Dead probably would get banned on the 21st. But it's definitely possible that some other people find some innovations and the format fixes itself. But
yeah, I think it's worth it to try and innovate. I think that the deck is slow enough that if you can find a niche. I mean, Rakdos was a deck that had a couple of points, and I think that there are really strong Rakdos cards. One of the problems with the format is that the mana is so bad that it makes these ramp decks and these color fixing decks so much better. 3 color mana decks are actually better than 2 color mana decks because of Fabled Passage.
sure.
But something to think about is one of the decks that I know has a good Golos matchup did not do super well, and as other decks get pushed out, I think something like Green-Blue Flash could make an uptick in the format.
You think that deck has a good Golos matchup?
Yeah, I do. As somebody that's played a lot of the deck, I do think it has a good Golos matchup.
Interesting. I would believe that their best hands are going to beat you, but they're probably going to beat most things.
That's true.
It doesn't seem like they're quite aggressive enough to not just let you make a bunch of land drops.
Sure.
But
Sure.
I could be wrong.
You can check out our Patreon over at patreon.com/ccmg, become our newest patron and get a shout out on the show. And then also check out some of the new rewards coming out. We got new tokens being created. Matt's going to be a construct. My dog, Obi, is going to be a wolf. So stay tuned for that. And then, yeah, you can find me at Expensive13H. You can find Matt at The Witch Cling. You can find the show at CCMTG on Twitter. You can like Constructive Criticism on Facebook. Don't forget to subscribe. Hit that like button over on YouTube if you're watching there. It means the world to us every single time. You can join the conversation by becoming a patron of $5 or more. Join the Constructive Critics group, or just join the Discord. There's a public link here in the show notes. Whether you're listening on Spotify, iTunes, anywhere you're listening, anywhere you're watching, there's going to be a link to that Discord. We have a free $500 event. You can win money to Oasis Games in store credit for free. Every quarter. We got, coverage coming out. The announcement is coming very soon as we kind of finalize coverage, finalize the dates, things like that. Don't forget to check that out. Yeah. With that being said, Matt, let's talk Legacy and Modern. We already said what we play in Standard. What would you play in Modern today?
I would play Devoted Druid. I think we talked about that a little bit as well. I'm pretty comfortable with the deck, and I think that it has the best game one in the format.
I think I've changed my mind, for what it's worth. As I was kind of thinking about this, while I think that I would, if I can't find a deck that's just legitimately great, I would obviously just play Titan Shift. I think that deck is pretty reasonable still. I don't see a reason that the deck wouldn't be fine for the most part. But that being said, I actually would not hate just playing Amulet Titan. Like, I enjoy big mana decks. I enjoy watching that deck be played. I think Once Upon a Time is a great addition to that deck. In Legacy, I would just play Jeskai. I'm a big fan of the blue decks in that format, and I don't see a reason to kind of get off of that. And I think that's one of the better blue decks right now.
Sure. Yeah, in Legacy A right now, I would play some version of Turbo Depths. I'm not exactly sure on a complete list right now, but I have been playing Once Upon a Time, which I think is pretty good.
Sure.
I have played the deck in the past and didn't like it very much, but I've just been on a complete tear with that deck right now.
It's interesting. I hope that Once Upon a Time is a good enough card to kind of shake up the Brainstorm meta in that format. Like, that would actually be kind of cool.
Sure. I don't think that Once Upon a Time is like the linchpin to this deck, or...
I just mean in general, right? Just lifting up non-blue decks enough, right?
Sure. Yeah, I'm not sure that that's the direction I would go for non-blue decks to be lifted, but I mean, honestly, the Turbo Depths deck is good against most of the blue decks.
Sure.
Already. But
well, thank you everybody so much for listening. We appreciate you. Don't forget to check out our sponsor over at Oasis Games and check out our Patreon, and we'll see everybody next week with another episode of Constructed Criticism.
See ya.